Brailsford with Red Chip Company. Thank you for joining today's event with Nexalin Technology, which trades on the Nasdaq under the ticker NXL. With us today, we have Mark White, President and CEO of Nexalin. We will begin with a brief presentation in a moment, and then we'll open this event to your questions. I will keep everyone's lines muted throughout the presentation. Users may reach Mark at any time by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and typing in their question. Before we begin, please allow me to read the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management, constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical fact should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. I now turn this webinar over to Mark. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark White. I'm the CEO of Nexalin Technology. It's good to be with many of you again. I'm sure that some of you have seen some of my presentations in partnership with Red Chip. And for those of you that have not participated in one of my presentations, welcome. Let me just start by sharing a little bit of information about me so you understand how I'm going to present today. Frequently, CEOs will present off decks and get sort of locked into a lane, reading slides, etc. Over the last year of doing a lot of investor relation presentations, I found it to be much more effective to stay focused on the technology in a more conversational format. And so what I'd like to do today is to use that format to just start a conversation about what I believe to be a growing scientific community and a growing patient community and a growing investment community believed to be the future of not only mental health treatment, but healthcare, health and wellness in general. But let's stay focused on mental health. All right, everyone on this call knows one or two, if not more than that, knows someone struggling with some form of a mental health issue. This could range from our children with dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, behavior problems, autism. It could be our parents with dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive issues, memory issues, or it could be ourselves or someone in our peer community, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, addiction, opiate addiction, etc. And the reason I start there is to, as I said a moment ago, to remind everyone we all know someone. And what all of these conditions have in common is a brain-based disorder. There is some type of a health issue in the brain. We have health issues in the body that we're all familiar with. We're not as open in our mental health conversations as we probably should be. And part of that is because of the stigma, and I'll talk a little about that later. But also, there's a whole nother challenge to mental health issues, and that is the lack of efficacy, the side effect profiles, risk profiles, addiction related to the medications, dependency on medications, etc. And where I'm going here is the only standard of care that really any of us have access to today is going to involve some type of medication, side effects, lack of positive response, or some type of talk therapy. And only in the recent years has that standard of care been willing to look at what is becoming what we call neurostimulation. And when we talk about neurostimulation, we're talking about the ability to stimulate, excuse me, the neurons of the brain. In other words, the brain itself. And when we stimulate the brain, the idea is to stimulate or to promote, or another term is evoke, to create a response in the brain that amounts to a normalization or a reduction of symptoms associated with mental health. So that's a whole lot of information. But at the end of the day, what Nexalin Technology is in the business of is stimulating the brain, not a piece of the brain, not a network in the brain, but the entire brain. And we stimulate it in a non-invasive way. We stimulate it in a way that you cannot feel it. The human body cannot detect it. And that's going to come to the natural electrical energy of the body that I'll tell you about next. But again, we are a non-invasive neurostimulation that relies on power and frequencies to promote a specific response in the brain that will create health and wellness or reduce, if not eliminate, a mental health issue. So let's come back to the brain for a minute. The brain has two systems. It has a chemical system. Some call it neurotransmitters, some call it neurohormones. It's neurotransmitters, it's chemicals of the brain. And then you have an electrical frequency system of the brain. And frequencies and hormones come together with the natural organic matter of the brain, fat tissue. And I'm simplifying this, but this will keep the message easier to understand. And those two systems come together and they create an organic supercomputer. It is the ability to process information life on life's terms. And when these two systems are in balance, you have quality of life. You can sleep, you can eat, you can process conflict, you can deal with trauma. And when one of these two systems is out of balance, you have a mental health issue, anxiety, depression, insomnia, attention deficit disorder, memory issues, etc. And so historically, the idea that the pharmaceutical companies came up with is, what if we could chemically disrupt or chemically interject into the brain hormones and expect it to normalize? So what if we could chemically stimulate a chemically dysregulated brain and then expect it to be normal? Well, obviously what we have with that formula is a lack of efficacy and a strong side effect profile with now a strong risk profile. And so the idea was, how do we begin to adjust or help the brain to normalize these systems? After all, this is the most complex system in the universe. It is an organic supercomputer. And what I'm proposing and what I'm going to explain here is Nexalin Technology. What if you could organically reset this supercomputer in a natural way, just like you reboot and reset your computer when you come in and it's moving slow and it won't process information? What do? You reboot and reset. More specifically, when you reboot and reset, you flush out the RAM, the memory. Once you clear out the memory, and then you reestablish some new networks, you turn on the computer and everything works. Let's simplify it and just think about this for the brain. What if you're struggling with some sort of trauma? What if you're struggling with some sort of a depressive condition? What if your brain is locked into some mental health struggle, and we could come in with a frequency pattern that was undetectable to you and to your brain, that's based on the natural energy of the brain? What if we could organically create a soft reset for the brain to where we can literally flush memories of trauma, flush chemical imbalances, reset, so that you now, over a period of weeks, instead of years or lifetimes, you could actually become healthy and have a better quality of life while reducing all the symptoms associated with the attention issues in your children, or the depression issues in you as an adult, or the memory issues in your parents related to Alzheimer's and dementia. And so when I talk about Nexalin Technology, we're a neurostimulation company. This is a breakthrough technology. Many of you will say, you know what, I've seen one of these. With all due respect, no, you haven't. This is a brand new breakthrough in the art of talking or communicating with the brain in such a way that you can organically reset networks that are at the source of a mental health issue. How are we different from all other types of neurostimulation? Neurostimulation basically comes in light stimulation to the eyes, audible stimulation through the ears, magnetic stimulation in the temporal area of the brain. You have these toys on the internet that use little batteries and wires that connect to your ears, or put a little sponge on your temporal head, etc. And these ideas, what they're all trying to do is, by stimulating the surface of the brain, you're able to create or evoke some type of response. It's essentially a dumbed down version of what some used to call shock therapy in the 50s. And none of that pertains to Nexalin, other than the fact that we are stimulating the neurons in the brain. What are we doing differently? Your brain is full of electrical energy that's frequency based. I mentioned that a few moments ago. So rather than create an electrical energy pattern like the voltage and the electrical current that you're very familiar with and that you don't want to feel, the electric and voltage that you may have heard about with shock therapy, or even the electrical little mild current that you feel with the little toys on the internet. The idea is that's not the electrical energy that Nexalin uses. In fact, what we've actually done is we've mastered the ability to create a supercomputer and a microprocessing system that emulates the natural electrical energy of the brain. In other words, we can talk to the brain in its native language, and we can increase the volume, the power, because you can't feel it, so there's no discomfort, and it's natural to the body. It's symmetry, if you will. So now we're able to talk to the brain, and rather than stimulate the brain on the surface like all the other technologies that are currently out there, what we're able to do is penetrate deep into the midbrain, evidence-based penetration. I'll get to the clinical trials in a minute. And in that penetration model, we're able to promote a response that acts almost as if you're organically resetting a trauma network in the middle of the brain that's associated with depression and other diseases. So this is the story of Nexalin and what makes Nexalin so unique. Is it evidence-based? Absolutely. So we don't have time today to go through the entire portfolio of clinical evidence, but there's currently approximately 19 clinical trials that are either in process or have been completed and published. I believe the last count on the publications is 10. It's possible that number has gone up. The company is moving so quickly right now. I know that Craig at Redship likes to ask me at the end, what's the investor profile here? What's the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is to, first of all, take part in an investment that is going to truly disrupt and challenge the standard of care in mental health. But why now? Well, why now is because the company truly is moving so quickly because of the 10 plus clinical trials that have been published, because of the clinical trials that are currently underway. And these trials focus in 3 areas, which actually is part of our business model. Let's start with what we call our primary mood disorders. So our focus there is anxiety, depression, insomnia. First up at the FDA will be insomnia. How do we get to insomnia first in the United States? Because insomnia is the easiest bar to clear from a regulatory standpoint so that we can get to market. But let's step away from the FDA for just a moment in the insomnia model. And let me tell you that recently we cleared in China and the Asia markets for depression and insomnia. We've cleared in the Middle East, in the Omanian territories, and other territories are being filed, applications are being filed as we speak, as well as depression in insomnia and anxiety in South America and Brazil. So when we talk about the primary mood disorders and coming back to the FDA, what we did is rather than put everything, all of our investment into our FDA model, we said, let's build a global model and go to areas of the globe where there's high demand for technology, there's high demand for non-invasive treatments, and most importantly, they're not as pharmaceutical dependent, meaning they don't rely on the lobbyists that overwhelm the televisions and our radios with medications. Who can we go to? Obviously, the Asian markets, the Middle Eastern markets, the South American markets. So those markets have been cleared. We should start seeing revenues and income beginning in Q3, Q4 2025 this year, and beginning to accelerate and pick up into 26. Coming back to the FDA model, insomnia first up. We've been in front of the FDA 3 times this year, actually over the last 18 months now, with all of the clinical data that I mentioned that's been published, some of it offshore, some of it onshore, and we chose insomnia first. The depression strategy is being developed as we speak, and we also are working in the anxiety model. This is what we call our primary mood disorders. From there, we go into what we call the concussion, traumatic brain injury, or the military model. So recently we are contacted by University of California, San Diego, UCSD in Southern California, and they wanted to study the technique in traumatic brain injury veterans that had not responded to traditional standard of care in the military treatment, i.e. medication, meditation, etc. They also were interested in the PTSD. Many of you will recognize that PTSD and traumatic brain injury, what I refer to as TBI, sort of go hand in hand with the military. So we had very positive results with studies at UCSD on our new powerful waveform. That, by the way, everything I'm presenting today has been protected through a very strategic and extensive intellectual property program using our American-based IP legal team to build a portfolio of intellectual property that eventually would be a global portfolio. We're currently filing in 32 countries as we speak. But coming back to the technology, the UCSD model looked at TBI, PTSD, heard about our technology, heard about the change, the breakthrough, if you will, in the neurostimulation community, and invited us to start sponsoring and helping assist them in their collaborative studies with the Department of Defense and the San Diego VA. This then promoted us or prompted us to go into the military health symposiums. We started presenting the data from the veterans that were responding to treatment. By the way, those studies used fMRI, PET scans, and MEG, magnetoencephalography. Just basically what that means is we did not rely on patient reporting symptoms to determine the response in the technology. We actually rely on biomarkers as well as patient reporting. So anyway, back to the TBI model, we had success at the military health symposiums. That prompted us to then go to Washington, D.C. So we've been about 32 times on the Hill. We're now in front of sitting senators, sitting congressmen, as well as members of the Department of Defense. We're now studying not only traumatic brain injury, PTSD, we're in the process of developing some cognition studies for the military, because at the end of the day, the military is focused on suicidation issues related to TBI and PTSD. And then their other focus is performance and what they call the cost of performance in the veteran under stressful circumstances. So that's the second area of interest, is the concussion TBI PTSD model, which is also part of the Nexalin America subsidiary. Nexalin America is a subsidiary of Nexalin that is dedicated to development of the military model, not only for research, but eventual distribution, not only active military, but those that have come home and found themselves in the care of their local veterans community. The last area of interest in those clinical trials that I mentioned is a little bit longer play, so it will require more extensive research. The first up is Alzheimer's dementia. When you look at our website and you go into the publications area, you'll see that the two most recent publications are in the Alzheimer's dementia. We've actually seen a great response in the investment community there as well, because what those studies indicated that we needed to do additional research, number one, but we needed to do additional research because we were showing some very positive responses from a physiological standpoint and from an imaging standpoint related to Alzheimer's and dementia. In addition to the Alzheimer's dementia, we've been looking at addiction, because as I mentioned when we started, addiction, dementia, depression, these are all brain-based disorders. Alzheimer's dementia is a little more difficult, but when you really get into the addiction field, we all know that there is a problem called chronic relapse. Our loved ones, once they get addicted, once they become alcoholics, they just simply can't stop. This is a brain-based disorder. And normally, unless you can stay sober for close to 2 to 3 years, you have an 85% chance of a relapse event occurring 5 to 7 different times before you finally start to recover. What this is attributed to is a brain-based disease that is the core of the imbalance in electrical and chemical issues of the brain. What if you could reset those networks associated with addiction, so that now, rather than waiting 3 years to get your strength in sobriety, you could actually summarize or reduce a 3-year window to weeks or months by resetting, there's that word again, resetting networks in the brain associated with addiction. So let me just do a quick summary of what I just said. Number one, your primary mood disorders. Number two, military, TBI, PTSD, concussion. Number three, longer-term plays that require more research, addiction, and Alzheimer's. This is where the focus of our technology has been from a clinical standpoint. All right, the next thing I want to tell you about is how do we actually do our business model? So originally, like many other stimulation companies, we were in the clinic, meaning you go to the doctor, you get a diagnosis, you go to the psychiatrist, you get a diagnosis, and then he has you sit in a chair for 45 minutes once a day, Monday through Friday for 6 weeks. And this was the in-clinic model. The issue here is still in the clinic, number one. Number two, a lot of those technologies were not much better than the efficacy associated with medication. It was non-invasive in some cases, and it was not medication, so the side effect profile, but there were some issues associated with the longevity of the treatment. In fact, would you fall into a relapse of your, quote, depression? So when Nexalin started developing its new advanced waveforms, which is basically the underlying how are we able to do what we do so powerfully? As I mentioned earlier, it's our waveforms. And so what we looked at is, all right, if the greatest issues currently for mental health treatment is associated with medication and the side effects, and then the lack of response from talk therapy, and then last but not least is the stigma. So our research shows that 6 out of 10 that qualify for a mental health diagnosis will never get treatment because they're afraid of the stigma of the psychiatrist. So during the COVID years, what we did is we took that time to step back into the laboratory, and our teams, our engineering teams, our research and development teams decided to actually take that clinical model, which used to be in about a 2 by 2 foot by 2 foot footprint clinical medical device that allowed pads to go on the forehead and behind each ear. When I mentioned when we start, we're a whole brain stimulator. So we stimulate across the entire frontal lobe of the brain, and we stimulate behind each ear, what's called the mastoids. So we said, what if we could take all of that clinical hardware and we could create a supercomputer using microprocessors, and we could put it into a headset, and then we could take that headset and give it digital capabilities to be managed, prescribed, and monitored in a digital ecosystem. Where I'm going here is think about telehealth, telemedicine, telepsychiatry, except this is a complete virtual experience. So now what I'm going to propose is that everything I've just spent the last 25 minutes telling you about is I'm going to tell you now that what we've done is stepped out of the clinical model and stepped into your residence, into your home. So the future of mental health care, in our opinion, is not only non-invasive neurostimulation with the Nexalin proprietary waveforms, but we're able to put it into a headset. And now I can just literally put this on my forehead. And as all of you can see, for those of you that have me on video, I now have a headset called the Nexalin Halo. This is stimulating across the frontal lobe of my brain. It's stimulating behind each ear. And across the entire front of the headset and down into the mastoid is a proprietary supercomputer, proprietary boards, processing systems. This is where the intellectual property lives. This communicates with the app on my phone. The app communicates with the cloud. The cloud is accessed through patient portals, doctors' portals, manufacturing portals, and the patient portal in the app on the phone. This is the future of mental health treatment. It's all in the privacy of your home. It's all managed through an appointment with a physician, because this is an FDA medical technology. This is not a toy. You cannot buy it on the internet. You must have an appointment. You must have a diagnosis. And once it has been prescribed, the device will be shipped to your home. You will get the device on the front porch. You'll open the box. You'll download the app in your phone. You'll scan the QR code of the device. And now that will then communicate with the cloud. And the protocol, the treatment protocol will now be downloaded into the headset and the app. This is the protocol that the doctor created from your original diagnosis interview that you went through, just like going to the doctor, the psychiatrist, etc., except you go into a virtual environment with our doctors in our virtual clinics. And then that is all prescribed and downloaded into the headset. And now every 30 days, you go back to the doctor. We will sell the product to the patient, and the device has for long-term recurring revenue, it will have a monthly subscription fee. Think of your cell phone. You know, many of us think when we go in and we buy our cell phone, not necessarily, but my point is this: when you make that payment each month, you're paying for the hardware and you're paying for the subscription to use the service so that the hardware can communicate. We have a similar type of model, subscription fee, hardware based, that will receive insurance reimbursement. Long strategy there, but it's very well thought out, very well planned, because it's more cost effective, much safer, and much healthier than the long-term dependency of medication. So this is the future, in our opinion. We do still offer and will continue to offer for complex mental health situations a clinical device. And the clinical device is we sell that hardware to the doctor, and then the doctor sells it individual treatments to the patient. It has a single-use disposable electrode that will be microchipped, and that is like the razor blade model, if you will. Both business models for the technology have a long-term recurring revenue associated with it in the form of a single-use disposable or long-term subscription fee. So now I've covered a little bit about the technology, the non-invasive nature. What makes it different? It's the most powerful frequency-based waveform in the neurostimulation community. Deep intracranial frequency stimulation is our trademarked, what we're copyright, because that's basically what we're doing, because the issues associated with mental health, evidence indicates that it's in the deep midbrain, between the ears, behind the eyes, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the anterior cingulate, all these great network structures of the midbrain. And this is what we're able to stimulate and penetrate with the technology. We stepped away from the clinical model and the clinical intervention and got into a virtual, so that you as a patient can now have a private appointment in the comfort of your home. You can determine how much of that is filed under medical insurance or cash pays. It's strictly up to the privacy of the consumer. The idea is to have somewhere between 75 and 90% efficacy. All of our clinical trials, the 10 that have been published and others that are coming, all rely on some type, or the majority of them rely on some type of an imaging technique to establish the biomarker associated with the illness, as well as the symptoms associated with the illness. So we're looking at 75 to 90% efficacy in the primary mood disorders and other issues associated with injury and trauma that I've discussed. The future of the technology is to continue to build the clinical evidence. So as you can imagine, I've already said there have been 10 published. There's another 9 that are either completed, data being interpreted, or are submitted for publications. All of this is still yet to come. And the entire clinical model has been developed so that it can be, as I mentioned, offered in a virtual setting. I think that that's a pretty good start and a pretty good summary of where we are. That'll leave us 15, 16 minutes for any questions that any of you might have. I'm available for that.
Thank you very much, Mark. And we already have many questions submitted. To remind everyone, to reach Mark, click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type in your question. Mark, will the new FDA approve Gen 2? The old FDA seemed to drag its feet.
So yes and yes. Let's quickly. Gen 1, the original technology, not nearly as complicated a waveform, much less power, was originally approved anxiety, depression, insomnia. We received notice December 2019. FDA changed the laws. They created, they challenged all neurostimulation companies to go back to the labs and redo all their clinical data, or create clinical data if they had or did not have, because of the 510(k) program. Let me try to answer it more efficiently. So the idea was, is they changed the laws. This is when we were just creating our new waveforms. We informed the FDA we were no longer going to distribute the Gen 1 technology. It still has FDA clearance for anxiety and insomnia. It is still in good standing with the FDA. We dropped depression because depression was a class 3 high risk. We then came out with the Gen 2. The Gen 2 is the more powerful new waveform that received the new intellectual protection that I mentioned earlier. Gen 3 is the Halo headset that I just mentioned. So we're in the process of taking the Gen 2 through some applications with the FDA. We've had pre-subs with the FDA on Gen 3. The bottom line, timelines. So best case, we could see some pretty significant movement with the FDA within 8 months. The clinical trials are designed. Literally, we're waiting for the manufacturing process to begin on 300 more units. We've started manufacturing these technologies. We've been updating the Gen 2. 8 months best case, worst case 14 to 16 months with the FDA. This is why, as I mentioned earlier, we focused on our global business model because we didn't want to invest all of our capital in America. We wanted to prove the technology. We wanted to demonstrate the power of the technology, the safety of the technology. And that's why we started in our global model and then worked into our American model.
Do you foresee a stock offering being required in the next 6 months?
Stock offering. So as everyone is well aware, we're trading on the public markets on the Nasdaq exchange. What you may be asking is fundraising and what are we currently involved, et cetera. So if you look at our financials, and one of the strengths of Nexalin is how conservative we are with our capital model and where we spend our money. If we had more time, I could go through some of the examples, but basically you're interested in what does our runway look like. Some worst case, that runway is 10 to 12 months, best case, close to 16 months. I can tell you this, that, fundraising isn't, there's some on this call that have a really clear understanding of capital raises, and some of you may or may not, depending on what type of an investor you are. In the world I live in, when we raise capital to increase the value of the company and to enhance our projects, because every investment that we currently have on the books is beginning to pay off in some sort of a clinical return or an income return or a partnership and future distribution return. So it's a kind of a tricky question, and I don't mean to dance around it. This technology will probably require some additional funding at some point. When and where that takes place, I cannot tell you exactly, but I can tell you this, is that the team of investment advisors that we use at Nexalin, none of us has to be the smartest guy in the room. We just need to be the best at what we do in our respective roles, and we run a really deep bench, as they would say in baseball. We have a great team of advisors to protect our shareholders, whether you came in on day one or whether you came in last month. We're always taking our shareholders and how to best balance the company's needs, the financial needs, and the long-term shareholder protection.
With new heads at HHS and the FDA with a different perspective than prior, how can we get the message out that there are different treatments other than big pharma solutions?
Boy, I wish we were sitting at the dinner table and could have just a free-flowing conversation. So I'm smiling for those of you who can see me. We're talking about, there's obviously, for the first time, let's just say it for what it is. Regardless of your political affiliations, regardless of your beliefs about vaccines, regardless of your beliefs about pharmaceuticals, we are for the first time in this country talking about real issues related to food, related to pharmaceutical medications, related to opiates. I mean, we're now talking about issues that have affected the public health of not just the American society, but other societies. But we're finally talking about it. And in those discussions, we're starting to go, we're opening up, we're starting to go, regardless of where the political journey takes us, maybe we should look at what we're doing with medication. Maybe we should look at the model where we have enough medication to medicate the entire country 6 times. I mean, is that really what we want to do? And to be real honest with everybody, do we really want a healthcare model that only treats the symptoms and that puts us in a long-term financial and health-dependent relationship with pharmaceuticals? There's always going to be a time and a place for medication. But at the same time, shouldn't we try something that's more natural, that's safer, that's more effective, that actually gives quality of life? I mean, how many of you have listened to a medication commercial that talks about, shows the father running through the wheat fields playing with his children, and in the background it says, in rare situations, suicide may occur or bleeding may occur or whatever. It's common sense that we should be looking at this, and we are extremely engaged in our conversation in Washington, D.C. I mentioned I've been on the Hill 32, 33 times. We have a Nexalin advisory board of some very powerful members of the inside the Beltway, is what they call it in Washington, D.C. We have a team of lobbyists that are committed to the cause, the vision of Nexalin, because it's the right thing to do. So I appreciate the question, and I can tell you that you actually could hear my passion. I believe in this technology. I have put my heart and soul for almost 15 years into this technology at a clinical level and now at a professional level when I became the CEO in 2019. So that's a great question, and I appreciate it, and I hope my response answers it.
Thank you very much to both of you. Has commercial activity begun in China? Will it include headsets?
Yes and yes. Many of you will remember that at the time we took the company public, we did over $1 million worth of business in 1 quarter in China. And then the devastation of the second COVID shutdown in China, which was then followed, as most of you or some of you know, by a severe economic slowdown. So we've hit some strong headwinds in that China market. I personally, for those of you that follow me and listen to my meetings and my presentations, know that I am in China with my team every 6 weeks. And the reason we're there every 6 weeks is to continue to give them the unconditional support that they need to reestablish their entire business model and clinical model in China, because China is going through some very difficult times. And so, yes, we still have inventory in China that needs to be sold. Yes, we have the Halo, China Halo. That's a little bit different from the American because of the head, the fit of the head related to the Asian head versus the American head. So yes, the Halo will be a part of the model. Yes, the clinical model, we actually redesigned that model that we sold in 2022. We've designed it. We are in the process of introducing new brands for the technology. For those of you, if you're an old investor in the company, if you're a new investor in the company, you've probably seen a blend of old and new technology. We are revamping, redesigning the entire line so that it is a scalable distribution model with the state-of-the-art digital capabilities. And most importantly, we're no longer, we joke internally, the Star Wars R2-D2 model. We are building technology that will demonstrate the 2025 aesthetics and digital capabilities. And yes, all of those products will be sold not only in the Asia markets, but eventually in the other markets that I've mentioned, and stand by for the announcements of future distribution opportunities at the global level.
This person has a follow-up, Mark. Will we see Chinese revenue in Q2?
Q2 2025. My guess is we might see some late. I would expect revenues. So I just returned from China. This conversation did take place. Obviously, I need to be careful here. But there's a reasonable chance that we could see some revenues coming back out of those Asia markets in Q3, Q4 of 2025. There's still some headwinds in the China economy and the China medical community, but it's looking good. In fact, I'm very encouraged on what I'm seeing take place in China and the results that the partners in China are able to demonstrate to myself and the team.
Would you be open to a partner?
Time and place. That's a real broad question. Um, we're we're always looking at opportunities. We've built a state-of-the-art technology. We've built a premier executive team, and we've been able to do it at probably 30% of the burn rate of any other company like ours currently in the market in a public community. I mean, yes, we'll look at any opportunities, but these are very, as I mentioned earlier, we have a team of advisors, bankers, underwriters, regulatory specialists, clinical specialists. And this team is always looking at and exploring opportunities. I think that's a fair answer on that.
What do you find the average age of a target patient to be? And do you anticipate Medicare/Medicaid covering treatment? Thank you.
Second half, Medicare, CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, reimbursements. Again, we're studying that community extensively because we're seeing what we consider to be extremely positive movement on the reimbursement models coming out of the federal government. Other companies are struggling because they're so inefficient in the use of capital. And many of you on this call, because I suspect that some of you are out there, have been on these calls before and asked questions. And I can tell you that the reimbursement schedules that we're seeing for other types of technology that are very similar, not as far as neurostimulation, but not nearly at the level of complexity as ours, that reimbursement model is 2 or 3 times what we built our cash flow models and our projections and pro formas on. So CMS, Center for Medicaid Services, reimbursements, yes, absolutely. Now, when and where the federal government gets on board, that takes a team of consultants and strategic advisors that we are very careful. We don't want to get the cart too far in front of the horse, but I can tell you we're very strategic and aggressive in that model. As far as target age, so originally we were focused on the adults in the 35 to 50. I would say now, because of what our research indicates and what we're looking at in the areas that I mentioned and outlined for everybody earlier, you're going to see this down in the 20, 25-year-olds, especially students struggling on anxiety and test anxiety and cognitive performance in school. And then we're going to see all the way up into the dementia cognitive decline model. So that's basically a 20, 22-year-old up to a 60, 65-year-old. There could be some massive movement in that Alzheimer's dementia model because of the challenges related to slowing the progression of the disease. So I think that's a pretty good answer on those 2 questions.
Do you anticipate the VA using your device for all veterans at VA treatment centers in the future?
Not all, because that's a tall order. I do see our virtual clinic I think it will start in 2 areas. I think it's going to start, and so if you read my press releases, if you read our announcements, and you follow these calls and you follow me, you know that I'm basically providing you a real good, not a crystal ball, but the ability to see what we're doing and what we're up to. So in the veterans community, it's about the performance of the warfighter in a stressful situation. Stand by on that. We're working because at the end of the day, this is about brain health. What does brain health mean? Brain performance, peak performance. The second area with the military is going to be in the veterans that have struggled with various levels of trauma, TBI, PTSD, are the buckets they throw them in. But there's 2 major buckets there. One, if you're in a major metropolitan area, you have better access to treatment. But more importantly, as everyone is aware, there's a large part of our veteran community that is isolated from a veteran's facility because they're in smaller civilizations, smaller populated areas like Topeka, Kansas, or Wichita Falls, Texas, et cetera. There may be just the access. So I think that we're going to see cognition, performance, and we're going to see veterans in the outlying areas, and then eventually it's going to come into the hospitals for treatment for some of the major depressive psychiatric conditions.
We are right at the 5 o'clock hour. Mark, I'll just read one more comment from someone who has commented, who has asked a question today. I have other follow-ups, but would appreciate a call/conversation with Mr. White. Appreciate it. Love his passion and possible solution. Well, first attendee, we will be contacting you, and you will get your call with Mr. White. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our attendees today. For more information,
thank you, everybody. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to give some information about how to get. Okay, Mark had to jump. Just for everyone still here, for more information about Nexalin, you can reach us at 1-800-REDSHIP or email us at nxl@redship.com. You can visit RedShip's investor information page for Nexalin. It's nxlinfo.com. There you can view and download the investor presentation and fact sheet and sign up for news alerts on Nexalin. Please watch Small Stocks, Big Money, RedShip's program featuring exciting small cap companies on Bloomberg USA. That's on Bloomberg USA at 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Saturday night. Join RedShip's next webinar with ASP Isotopes on Wednesday, January 29th at 4:15 p.m. U.S. Eastern. You can register for that webinar and for all RedShip webinars at redship.com/events, where you can also view an archived version of today's Nexalin webinar. Thanks again to our many participants today, and thanks very much, Mark.